Last semester, our friend group from college would explore abandoned buildings in the area whenever we had free time. During the fall break of my sophomore year, my roommate Mark told me, and our friend Ryan, about an abandoned factory he had found online. It was a 40-minute drive from our dorm, but all three of us were curious enough to check it out. We'd explored old buildings before, but nothing as massive as an industrial factory. We decided to head there that same night after dinner. We packed our gear for the trip. We brought headlamps for exploring dark areas. We also made sure to bring extra batteries too. This was all standard equipment for our urban exploration trips. The factory was located in the industrial zone outside town, where we stopped at a gas station for some sodas, before parking and hiking about a mile through overgrown fields. We reached the building around 11 p.m. when the area was completely deserted and silent. Standing outside of it, it was just a hulking concrete structure with broken windows, something that had been shut down for decades, but had a strange pull that made us want to explore it. I realize now how stupid we were to go there. We had no idea what kind of danger was waiting inside. We approached the chain link fence surrounding the property. We found a gap and squeezed through. The main entrance was chained shut, and most windows were too high to reach. But Ryan pointed out a partially open loading dock door on the side of the building. We crawled under the rusted door and entered the factory. Just as we got inside, a loud metal clang could be heard through the vast space of the building. We told ourselves it was just something falling in the old structure, but the silence that followed made us all tense up. Looking around, the concrete floor was stained with oil, and there was a strong smell of rust and chemicals that hurt our noses. We stuck together, staying within sight of each other as we navigated through the maze of conveyor belts and machinery. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but something about the place made me think there had to be interesting stuff left behind. From the inside, though, the factory was enormous. There were multiple levels with catwalks and machinery rooms. There were also office spaces. Eventually, Mark and I realized Ryan was no longer with us. We noticed his absence after climbing a metal staircase to the second level. We turned around and tried to find him, but all the equipment and machines looked the same, even with our headlamps pointing in different directions. I called out asking Ryan where he was. Mark shouted that we were on the second floor catwalk, but our voices bounced off the metal and concrete, making it impossible to tell which direction they carried. We walked toward where we thought we heard a response, hoping Ryan could find his way back to the entrance if we couldn't locate him. As we crossed a catwalk, I heard what sounded like footsteps and the sound of a gun being reloaded. I stopped and told Mark to be quiet, listening closely. I didn't hear anything else for a moment. I carefully moved forward and peered around a corner into what looked like an old break room. A battery-powered lantern sat among piles of blankets, along with empty food containers and trash, clearly someone's living space. I turned, about to warn Mark, when I spotted a figure standing on the other side of the room. A man was in the shadows, aiming a pistol directly at my chest. He was dirty, with wide eyes and a face covered in dirt and scars. I slowly raised my hands and began backing away, telling him we were just exploring and meant no harm. Mark asked who I was talking to from behind me. Once he saw the armed man, Mark bolted away, and I immediately followed him. Suddenly there was a deafening bang and sparks flew as a bullet hit the metal railing beside us. I ran after Mark, moving around machinery and debris until we accidentally ran into Ryan near a set of stairs. He was scared, having heard the gunshot, and we quickly explained we needed to leave immediately. Ryan led the way back to the loading dock door, and we got out as fast as possible. None of us got hurt, but Mark and I were shaken for weeks afterward. 2 days later, we saw on the local news that police had arrested a wanted felon who had been hiding out in the abandoned factory after escaping from a nearby correctional facility. We had called the police immediately after getting back to our car, giving them details about the armed man and the layout of the factory from what we could remember. A couple of years ago, I agreed to watch my friend's 7-year-old daughter while she went out of town for work. I stayed at her house in the suburbs since it was closer to my work and had more space for the kid to play. The arrangement was supposed to be simple. Just keep an eye on the girl for the long weekend until her mom, my friend, returned on Sunday night. My friend had set everything up nicely, leaving food in the fridge and emergency contacts on the counter. 2 days into my stay, I got called in for an emergency night shift at the hospital where I work as a nurse. With the girl being so young, she couldn't be left alone, so I needed to find someone to watch her for about 6 hours. A fellow nurse at the hospital recommended a babysitter who had good references and was available that evening. I called the number and scheduled the sitter to arrive at my friend's house by 10 p.m. That night, the babysitter showed up right on time, introducing herself as Jessica. She looked to be around 25 years old, and from our brief conversation before I left, she seemed professional and friendly, exactly what you'd want in someone watching a child. I gave her specific instructions to lock all doors for safety and showed her where everything was located in the house. I thanked her for coming on short notice and left for my shift at the hospital. The night was busy with 3 emergency cases back to back. By 3:30 a.m., I was driving back around an hour earlier than planned due to a scheduling mix-up. I was drained from working overnight since I usually worked days, and the 5-minute drive felt longer than it was. I hadn't contacted Jessica to let her know I was coming back early, but just as I was leaving work, she sent a message saying she had a family emergency and had to leave. She said the child was already asleep and that she had locked the door on her way out. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked just as I had left it. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, relieved to find it locked just as Jessica said. The house was completely silent, and most of the lights were turned off except for a dim lamp in the hallway. I called out for Jessica just to double-check she had left, but there was no answer. My first instinct was to check on the child, so I hurried upstairs to her bedroom. I saw a lump under the covers and thought the girl was asleep in her bed. I felt relieved enough to go downstairs and make myself some coffee, taking my time to unwind from the stressful shift. After about 2 hours, I went back upstairs to check on the girl before I made breakfast. When I pulled back the blanket, I discovered it was just a pile of pillows arranged to look like a sleeping child. Panic immediately set in as I searched the other bedrooms and closets, calling the girl's name. I thought about calling the police right away, but was worried about alarming my friend unnecessarily if there was a simple explanation. I decided to search the house thoroughly first, not wanting to cause a huge scene if Jessica had just taken the girl somewhere nearby. I called Jessica's cell phone and heard it ringing from downstairs. I grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously opened the basement door, listening for any sounds from below. I decided not to go down there alone and instead pretended to leave, slamming the front door while actually remaining in the house. I positioned myself by a window where I could watch both the basement door and the front door of the house. After 20 tense minutes, I saw the basement door slowly open and Jessica emerge, checking if the coast was clear. She was carrying the sleeping child wrapped in a blanket and heading toward the front door. I confronted her immediately, blocking her path and demanding to know what she was doing. She stammered that the girl had been scared and they were hiding from an intruder that she thought she heard. As a nurse, I immediately recognized the signs of sedation. The child's slow breathing pattern, limp muscles, and unresponsiveness were textbook indicators of medication-induced unconsciousness, not sleep. I kept Jessica talking while secretly dialing 911 on my phone in my pocket, leaving the line open so the dispatcher could hear. The police arrived within minutes and found Jessica had multiple fake IDs, stolen prescription medications, and an emergency getaway bag hidden in her car. The child was examined at the hospital and found to have been given a mild sedative, as I had thought, but thankfully was otherwise unharmed. I later learned my coworker Carlos had only met Jessica at a bar 2 weeks earlier, and when she mentioned needing money, he recommended her for babysitting, hoping that helping her find work would improve his chances with her. My friend was horrified when she found out what happened and, unsurprisingly, has never left her daughter in someone else's care since. And still, she isn't talking to me to this day, which I can't really blame her for. I also have lost my trust in Carlos, and we rarely talk either, unless it's work-related, and we're forced to. It turns out that Jessica had always wanted a child, but couldn't have one of her own. When Carlos mentioned the babysitting job, she saw an opportunity and took it. If I hadn't come home an hour early, Jessica would likely have already left with the child before anyone realized. Instead, she hid in the basement after hearing me pull into the driveway, likely hoping to escape through a basement door. Thankfully, the basement didn't have an external door. She had no other way out. Jessica was sentenced to 8 years in prison after pleading guilty to attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, and drugging a minor. "8 months ago, I went to a remote cabin in the national park after my boyfriend broke up with me. I needed time away from everything, to clear my head and get some writing done. The cabin I rented was an old structure with a fast-flowing river behind it. Miles of dense forest surrounded the property, putting me at least 3 hours from the nearest town. I decided to use this time as a writer's retreat, since I hadn't made progress on my novel in months. About 12 days after I arrived, I packed some camping gear and hiked to a rocky shore by the river for an overnight stay. The cabin was a 3-mile hike away, making return trips risky in the dark if anything went wrong. I needed to spend a night under the stars to find inspiration for my writing. I made several trips to carry all my equipment, then set up the tent. It was actually really easy because it was made for beginners, so I had plenty of time to get everything else set up, as well as a rock circle for the campfire. Once that was all done, I kicked back and relaxed, sipping on a can of red wine as I watched the sunset. I had never had canned wine before. It wasn't as terrible as I expected. The calm sound of the campfire along with the forest was something I'd missed, having lived in a big city for so many years. But about 45 minutes after the sun had set, I was caught off guard by a guy walking up to my campsite from a distant hiking trail. I stood up when I saw him, and the man stopped walking and put his hands up, apologizing for the scare. He looked to be in his late 40s with a stocky build and a thick beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. I looked past at the trail he came from. There was dense brush on either side that eventually led back into the forest. I asked him where he came from. The man made a short grin as he explained he had gotten lost while hiking and saw my campfire, so he came over hoping I could point him back to the main trail. I gave a nervous smile, offering minimal help by pointing toward the east trail while keeping my distance. And thinking about it more, I realized there weren't any marked trails on this side of the river in this section of the park. I told him I couldn't offer much help, but suggested following the river downstream to find the ranger station, hoping this would be a quick, harmless interaction. The guy seemed almost puzzled by my response, as his grin went down to a straight face. He lingered too long, scanning the area around my campsite and equipment. Then after a few moments of silence, he nodded and walked back the way he came from. I watched, trying to keep track of him to see where exactly he was walking to, but he faded out into the darkness of the woods without any flashlight. Feeling pretty unnerved, I decided to grab most of my stuff and haul it back to the cabin, not wanting to risk being outside with that guy around. Trying to carry everything at once, though, was a bad move on my part, exhausting me after only covering a quarter-mile of the steep terrain back to the cabin. And just as soon as I stopped for a breather, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the brush. I turned around, seeing the man emerging from a dense thicket in the dark and right toward me with a look of insanity in his eyes. I dropped everything and tried to run, but immediately felt him grab my backpack, yanking me backward. We both tumbled near the edge of a steep ravine, and I somehow managed to get on my feet before he could get a hold of me again. The guy followed close behind, though, even close enough to grab my jacket a few times in an effort to stop me. When I got to the cabin, I knew I'd have no time to unlock the door, so I had to go straight for my car. I pulled the keys out of my pocket as I ran up to it, getting inside and locking it just before he got to the door. I turned it on and put it in reverse as the man swung a heavy branch at the window, shattering it with just a couple of hits. He reached in and grabbed my arm as I backed up, forcing me to swerve my car directly into him. It must have caught him by surprise, because he didn't move fast enough to get out of the way. All I saw was his body slam onto the ground and not get up as I drove away. I called for help while I drove, alerting the park rangers to get there quickly, to apprehend him, or provide medical assistance if needed. When they arrived, they found no one there. The rangers later found a trail of blood leading deep into the wilderness, but the man was never located.